Welcome back to Propaganda by the Seed. Today we're talking pears with Lauren Cormier, and I've got some clips from my last visit to the late, great Blaine Fortin, a local hybrid pear enthusiast. So lots of neat stuff coming up, but before that, let's hear from our friends at the Channel Zero Podcast Network. And if this next voice sounds familiar, it might be because we had Nicole of Frontline Herbalism on Propaganda by the Seed as a guest way back in 2022. And now she has her own podcast, which you should check out.
The Frontline Herbalism podcast is a show for people who love plants and care about liberation. Plant knowledge, medicine-making tips, interviews, and advice on how to skill up to strengthen collective autonomy, self-defense, and resilience to climate change, capitalism, and state violence. Find the podcast at solidarityapothecary.org/podcast.
Lauren Cormier, welcome to Propaganda by the Seed.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
So I like to start most interviews with asking people to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how they're working with plants and how they came to be on that path.
My name is Lauren Cormier. I live in Palermo, Maine, and I grew up gardening with my family and always around a lot of horticulture. And as I got older, I started to become more interested in fruit specifically. And then somewhere along the line, I became much more focused on pear trees. But I work at the Maine Heritage Orchard in Unity, Maine, at MOFGA, Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. And I'm an orchard specialist there, and we have over 300 varieties of apples in the orchard. It's a preservation orchard of historic varieties that were grown in Maine in the 19th century and before then. And we are also trying to increase the pear collection in the orchard. So I go around the state of Maine trying to find the oldest pear trees I can find, identify them, DNA test them if necessary, and propagate them to put them behind deer fencing so that they can be preserved and essentially used as a scion bank to get out there into the world so they aren't lost in obscurity.
Awesome. That seems like really, really important work when we've lost so much of the genetic heritage of agriculture to grab anything that's left and keep it from going extinct.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the old fruit trees that we find around are a couple hundred years old, if not older. And so they're really on their last legs in terms of finding some really interesting genetic diversity in both old cultivars and old seedling pear trees as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So on the topic of pears more generally, what are the different types of pears and where did they come from?
Yeah, so there are many different types of pears. Pears are in general divided into two groups, Asian pears and European pears. They all Pears species, which there's about 30 species roughly, and some interspecific hybrids as well. And they all came from the area spanning between Europe and basically Iran, but also spanning down into North Africa a bit, and then as well into China, Japan, and Korea. So the Asian pears obviously came from China and that area, and then Pears communis, which is the European pear that we think of when we eat a pear, that's probably two different species, Pears caucasica and Pears pyraster, which are both from Europe and the Middle East. And so Yeah, so they originated in that area and were probably hybridized in ancient trade routes during like 2000 BC or even before then. So
amazing.
yeah.
So kind of similar story to like an apple, where we've got Malus domestica, which is this like hybrid that became the kind of standard.
Exactly. Yep.
Very cool. And do you know when they came to North America?
So we don't know exactly. I mean, it's likely that they came over possibly with the French. They could have even come over with Basque fishermen. And then eventually they also probably were brought over by the English as well. And so they probably came along two different routes. But in the 1800s, English settlers had made note of pear trees, seedling pear trees, that were still alive that looked to be a couple hundred years old. So those must have been here in the 1600s. So it's hard not to believe that the French didn't bring any pears with them, pear seed down with them. Cool. Into Maine.
So quite a while.
So a while.
Yeah.
So like around the 1600s or so, I would say the first pear seeds were probably planted in Maine. That's my best guess.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
What would you say are kind of the essentials of pear cultivation? Like what if someone wants to grow a pear, what do they need?
Yeah, so you need full sun. You definitely need well-drained soil. From my experience, pears can handle heavy soil a little bit better than apples can. So it's not ideal to, say, plant a pear in clay soil, but you can work that clay to make it amenable to pears. And by adding some sand and even sort of lifting up the tree a little bit so it's a little bit above grade. But pears really don't like sandy soil, which is unfortunate for me because I have very sandy soil on my property where I want to plant pears. And from firsthand experience, they're struggling to get. They want like a heavy loam, some rich soil, so some fertility.
Build up.
Yeah, yeah.
And what's the sort of like cycle of like maintenance for the year look like for pears?
So, in the wintertime, generally people prune in the wintertime. There are some people we know who would prune in the summertime. I've always pruned in the wintertime out of the fear of getting fire blight during the summer pruning. So pruning's done in the winter, and then if you need to do any spraying for pears, that would be done during the summertime. Pears, I will say, are probably easier as a no-spray crop than, say, apples are in terms of pests and diseases. But there are still some things like pear blister mites that can get on the leaves, and some fungal diseases on the leaves and fruit like scab and fabrea leaf spot that can really affect pears if it builds up. So we spray in the Heritage Orchard. We spray the fruit through the summer with organic methods and holistic methods, and then we also keep the trees mulched all through the summer, weeded all around the trunk. Unlike the apples, we don't use neem oil at all because pears are very susceptible to burning if the neem oil is sprayed on the foliage, so we don't do that. But pretty much any other sprays are okay to use on pears that you would use on apples. And then they start coming into bearing. Probably the earliest pears are like in July, but most are probably August through October that you would harvest the fruit from them.
Nice.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of diseases. Would you say those are the primary ones? And if we could go back over those and talk a little bit about like what you can do to manage them.
Yeah. So I think fire blight is the biggest, the most destructive disease for
that
sure.
one's pretty rough.
Yeah.
And hard to manage because it's a bacterial disease.
Exactly. Yeah. And, it really wasn't as much of an issue in Maine about 10 years ago. I don't know if that's your experience as well.
That has been my experience. I only saw fire blight for the first time like 2 years ago.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So it's a fairly new disease. I remember people used to talk about it in Massachusetts, and I would think, oh, yeah, we don't really have to worry about that here. And sure enough, it's here. Yeah, so it's here. And so we spray, we have pesticide licenses. Spraying is probably my least favorite task of anything in the orchard.
I would 100% agree with that.
Yeah. But out of necessity of getting some fruit and really taking the best care of the trees, for fire blight, we spray copper and double nickel, especially in the very beginning of the season. And then as needed, if we start seeing fire blight strikes on the trees. There's a new product called Agrophage, which is also a preventative, and you can spray it if fire blight strikes start happening like this time of year is when you would see it in July. And so when we do see fire blight strike on a pear tree, we immediately cut it out, and we try to cut back 18 inches further back on that limb. If that goes into the main trunk, we'll just cut that whole limb off. But if you start seeing fire blight in the main trunk of the tree, your tree is probably not going to make it. It's probably systemic at that point.
That has been my experience, and I've mostly dealt with fire blight at Mount Joy Orchard.
Yeah,
and we lost a few trees.
Pears or apples?
Mostly quince, actually.
Yeah, quince is so susceptible.
I think we lost one pear, and like 3 quince.
Yeah,
and then had some like significant damage to several other trees, but
yeah,
it's looking hopefully not as bad this year.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, I know. Now is when it starts popping up.
Yeah.
So diligence about checking and is the most important thing, so it doesn't spread rapidly. Some varieties are less susceptible, so keeping note of which varieties people are seeing it on is good to do, and we're really just sort of learning about that. I will say it's sort of mysterious, like Stacyville pear in John Bunker's orchard is getting fire blight really bad. We haven't had Stacyville get it at Mofka yet. So there is something about like it building up on the site too.
Yeah.
Proximity to other trees with fire blight. But some varieties can sort of isolate it and not let it spread. And so some of the newer varieties, like the Harrow series, they're being bred so that they're more fire blight resistant.
Cool.
So, yeah. The other disease, or pest, I should say, is pear leaf blister mites. Usually as the leaves emerge, you'll see like little pink dots on the leaves, and then those will turn sort of brownish as the season goes on. And those are little mites that lay dormant in the buds. And the best thing to do is to spray a dormant oil, like a mineral oil or stylet oil, on the trees when they're dormant and just sort of breaking dormancy. It can't still be freezing temps. So it's like that time in spring when the trees are just sort of starting to wake up.
Nice. And the idea there is you're like smothering the mites just as the bud is opening.
Yep, exactly. Okay, cool. Yeah. And then, copper, double nickel, they are also helpful for fungal diseases like leaf spot. Black leaf spot is a common one on pears. Mm-hmm. But overall, besides those, there really isn't a lot. And scab, I should say scab is also an issue. But I don't feel like they have as many pests and diseases as, say, apples do.
Yeah. I would say they're in a sort of a medium range of like, they're not as easy as like a mulberry or a pawpaw or something. But definitely easier than an apple or any prunus.
Exactly. Yes, way easier than prunus for sure. Yeah. I sort of dream of having a no spray pear orchard someday, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Well, we'll come back to that
Yeah.
towards the end, and the potential for that. Have you experimented much with dwarfing rootstock, and is that something that really makes sense for pears?
So historically, quince was used as the dwarf rootstock for pears, but not all varieties will take on quince. And as we just said, quince is so susceptible to fire blight that I don't know if it really, in this climate, is the best rootstock. And so I don't think you really see people currently doing a lot of pear on quince, at least in the Northeast.
Yeah, me either.
So the biggest one people are using is Old Home Farmingdale and 97, which is a standard rootstock. That is a little bit problematic in that I think there are viruses that come in on that clonal rootstock. Like apples, there's a lot of different rootstocks you can choose from, especially with clonal. And with pears, it's like Old Home Farmingdale. Like there's not a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of the standard.
It's the standard. And then there's a dwarfing Old Home Farmingdale 333, which I tried grafting some pears on last season. I don't know how dwarfing it is compared to the 97. Seth Yentis at North Branch Farm has grafted a number of pears on it, and he says he can't tell the difference between the size. That's his experience. Dwarfing rootstocks may size up differently in the Northeast than they would in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
So I don't have enough experience, and I haven't seen a whole lot of pears on dwarf rootstocks. That doesn't mean there isn't any.
Most pears I've seen are gigantic because they really want to grow vertically, and like you can kind of stop that with training.
Yeah.
But most people who are planting pears don't know to do that, and they just get gigantic really fast.
Yeah, and then it's really hard to turn it around once they do that. Yeah.
Especially if you're not summer pruning. Because of the risk of fire blight.
Exactly. So. Yeah. So pears are big trees.
Yes.
Yep.
Are there any varieties that you would think of as like the easiest pears to grow?
I mean, I think Asian pears might be a little bit easier to grow than European pears in terms of pests and disease. They always seem really healthy. They do get fire blight, some of them, but they fruit quicker, and I think the Asian pear is a good like home orchard pear. I feel like, especially at the Maine Heritage Orchard and in my own orchard, I'm just starting to grow pears, so it's hard for me to say like if there's a cultivar that's easier or not. But I think it just really depends on the site and what the soil is like.
Yeah. And
probably, as much I love the heirlooms, but probably some of the newer varieties that are less susceptible to fire blight are worth growing, like Moonglow and some of the new ones.
Yeah, that's good to know, because disease resistance, when I started planting trees, I, like so many people, was like excited about these rare heirlooms.
Yeah.
And now I'm just like, what can I not spray and still get a good harvest from?
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely the newer varieties I think would be easier. But that is why we're sort of trialing all these old varieties to see how they do here in Maine and what will perform the best. So I should know more in like 15 years.
Great.
When they start fruiting.
I'll check back with you in a decade or so, and we'll see how's it going.
Yeah.
Beyond fresh eating, what can you do with pear fruit?
So there's a lot of like seedling pears around Maine that you wouldn't necessarily eat. Those pears traditionally were probably used for perry, which is like the pear hard cider, essentially. People also, so the pears that we have now were largely bred in the 1800s. Before then, pears weren't always sweet, and often they were like sort of hard, astringent, small fruit. And they were used for canning, for preserves, for drying, and even cooked for like stews and with meat, savory dishes. Like they were a source of sustenance when there wasn't probably a whole lot in early New England. So traditionally, they have a lot of different uses. And I think in the Middle East, when Nikolai Vavilov was there and looking at pear trees, he noticed that people were drying them and then like grounding them up into a meal and adding them to barley flour and things like that.
Fascinating.
So,
I've never heard of that.
yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So traditionally, I think they had a lot of uses, but now we think of them really as a sweet dessert fruit. So, and pear is really making a comeback, I would say, here in the U.S. and has been in Europe for, hundreds of years, but it's becoming more popular again, as is hard cider.
Cool.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Blaine Fortin for a minute. How did you meet him, and can you give a little thumbnail sketch of the man?
I was fortunate enough to meet Blaine. It was a little bit random, but John Bunker, who I've worked with for a long time and was a mentor to me, one day said, "Hey, I think Blaine reached out to John about all his pears," and had probably reached out to him over the years for different things. And John said, there's this person in Bodenham and he's got all these pears. Here's his phone number. You might want to give him a call. I had no idea if he was collecting old varieties or what he was doing. So I just sort of randomly called Blaine and asked him what he was up to with the pears. And he told me all about the hybridization that he had been doing in his home orchard. And I thought, this is so different from what I'm doing with like finding old pear trees, but I have to go check this place out. Like, this sounds sort of wild. So when I came down to southern Maine one day, I called Blaine and said, "Hey, I'm driving by Bodenham. Are you around?" And sure enough, he was. And I stopped by and he took me on a tour through the orchard where we proceeded, and it happened to be prime like pear time. Every pear was still on the tree in perfect ripeness. And we went through the orchard and tried every single one.
Amazing.
I was almost sick like in the beginning because like, as you know, there's like multiple grafts on, so it's not just like one type of pear to each tree. It was like, so hundreds of pears were consumed that day.
Yeah, that can be rough on your stomach.
Yeah.
That's like too much of a good thing.
Yeah, it was. But at the same time, I just thought, like, how unbelievably rare is this to happen? So that was my first experience with Blaine, and I just kept going back to visit him after that.
Yeah. Can you describe a little bit about what his pear breeding project was?
So from what I understand, Blaine took an old pear tree that I actually don't know if it's still standing. I need to actually see, in Brunswick, which he said was a Bartlett type. It's a pretty good chance it was a Bartlett considering how many Bartletts are around Maine. And then he crossed that with, that's a European pear. He crossed that with the Asian pear 20th century, which is also called Nijiseki. And then those seedlings, he would basically grow them out in his nursery, take the ones that had desirable traits that he could see, and he started planting out an orchard, and I believe got several generations of those. Correct me if you have a different understanding of this.
No, that sounds about right. I think he may have gotten as far as an F3 generation.
Okay, yeah.
Which is wild. And I do have some audio from him that I might use in this, but we'll try and cover the basics in case that doesn't pan out or isn't workable audio quality.
Yeah, I tried to get like a clear idea from him on if he was back crossing and what the process of his breeding was. And it was really hard to get a straight answer that I
Yeah.
could that I was able to understand.
He was a bit of a rambler.
Yeah. So that part of it isn't super clear to me. But if you have any insight onto the back crossing.
Yeah, not really.
Yeah.
It definitely was pretty clear that the original parentage was this Bartlett type European pear and 20th century.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, I have no idea what happened.
Yeah.
How would you describe his orchard? Like when you come in that gate in the deer fence, what are you seeing?
Yeah. So it's probably like one of the most well manicured orchards I've ever seen in terms of the pruning and the thought that has gone into just the spacing and the care of the trees. They are not huge pear trees like we were just discussing. They are a manageable size that you could actually pick and spray, which is so unique in the world of pears. They definitely resemble more Asian pears, I would say, than European. And Asian pears probably lend themselves to being a little bit easier to maintain, although they also can get pretty large as well. So it sort of looks like you're pulling into an orchard of Asian pears, I would say. But then it's surrounded by like all kinds of perennials, pollinator plants, and then there's a lot of hickory sort of above the pears, not shading it out, but just sort of throughout the orchard. And then you see walnuts and heart nuts and almost like every kind of tree species that you could grow in the state of Maine is somewhere on the property.
Yeah. An incredible collection of all different kinds of edible and ornamental plants. Really an very, very interesting garden. And just like the stories of a lifetime of plant collecting, he had a whole row of lilacs that were either salvaged from or descended from the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow garden in Portland, because he was a landscaper for many years and did some renovations on that garden and kind of removed some original plantings and replaced them. And whoever he was working for didn't, like, oh yeah, we're just replacing these. And he thought that it was important to preserve these, so he just planted them in his garden. Fascinating character, and such a generous person. He seemed to have no interest in like monetizing or commercializing any of his work, and just wanted to give it all away, which I think is a very, admirable thing if you can do that.
Yeah, I don't get the impression he ever sold any of the fruit, that it was all given to gleaners and people who just wanted to come by and pick.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about what the orchard is like, what the site is like. What about the pears? How would you describe their quality and their flavor?
Yeah. So I'd say that there's a lot of variation, a surprising amount of variation, considering every tree in that orchard has the same parentage. So you would think, oh, like they're going to be somewhat similar, and yet there was so much variability. Some of them really did sort of resemble Asian pears, and some had a clear pyriform shape like a European pear with more flavor than you might expect from an Asian pear. But I would say there was a lot of butterscotch flavor, caramel. Most of them were sweet. I wouldn't I don't think some of them didn't have a lot of flavor, but there was like, yeah, you could tell that there was the influence of European pear in some of them. And the fruit looked perfect. I didn't see any signs of disease or pests anywhere.
That was the most shocking thing to me was here's this huge orchard. I mean, not huge in the scheme of orchards, but for a home planting, it was extensive, talking hundreds of trees, maintained by this one guy. And everything looks perfect. And when I asked him, like, oh, what is your spray program? He was like, oh, I haven't sprayed in like 10 years, anything. It's like, holy shit. Like, how about like fertilizer? Like, how are you caring for these trees? Oh, it's like, well, I prune, like 3 times a year, never in the winter. It's like, what? It's not how it's done normally. But it was working exceptionally well. And he was very clear that he had kind of like studied the masters as far as like the like 19th century horticultural texts were stuff that he could kind of cite chapter and verse to say like, oh, this is I do it this way, and because so and so recommended in this book, like that's how you do it.
Yeah.
And it was really, really working. And I am very interested to see if these trees have a high degree of genetic resistance, or if that incredible lack of pest and disease pressure was site-specific or management-specific. We may never know entirely, but it's going to be an interesting thing to continue to work with these plants.
One thing I think that's hard to know how much of an effect it's had on the health of the orchard is that, and his orchard is very unique in this way, is that all of those pears are on their own roots. So they weren't grafted onto Old Home Farmingdale, the clonal rootstock, which often comes in with viruses. I mean, when I graft onto Old Home, I'll notice most of the pears will take, but then you'll see like blackened lesions on the rootstock, which eventually go up into the variety, which is probably a virus that's just coming in on that rootstock. So he didn't have to contend with any of that by doing these pears on their own roots. And it's hard not to think like if that has something to do with the vitality of that orchard.
Very interesting question. I grafted scionwood from Blaine's orchard in 2 places. Here onto a multi-graft tree that is probably Old Home by Farmingdale. But I also grafted about 15 of them at Mountjoy Orchard onto bird-planted calorie pear. So it'll be very interesting to see how they perform differently on these different sites and different rootstocks. And that calorie pear, I would guess, has low or minimal virus load as seedling rootstock. Yeah.
I grafted the scions from Blaine's onto Betulafolia rootstock, which is what Asian pears are typically grafted onto, which is a seedling rootstock, not clonal. And they all took, but it'll be interesting to see long-term how they do. Ideally, I would have started seeds from Blaine's pears, but maybe that will happen in the future. But for now, it was more just like, let's just get these grafted onto whatever we possibly can. So
totally.
Yeah.
So now for the less exciting part. I first met Blaine when you sent me an invitation to come visit his site. That was last year, maybe like early fall. And you were there, Jack Cortez was there, CJ from Mafka was there. And we got an amazing tour, tasted tons of different pears, collected fruit. saw a lot that day, and learned some sad news that Blaine did not expect to see this summer, which was surprising because he seemed at that time to be in good health, kind of an older guy, but not, he was able to get around just fine. But it did, over the next few months become clear that he wasn't, his life was drawing to an end. And how would you describe the efforts that you and others put into trying to preserve some of his agricultural legacy?
So I didn't know that Blaine passed away until just after he died. Eliza Greenman, who works with the Savannah Institute, had been in touch with him through the winter because she was really interested in getting some of his selections and trialing them for fire blight resistance. And so she passed along the news to me and said that she was going to be coming up to Maine to collect scions to bring back down to the south to be trialed on calorie pear. And so I met up with her and you and our friend Clark and mapped out the orchard, which first needed to be done, since Blaine never gave any names to any of the selections or numbers or anything. So we mapped the whole thing out. And before he passed away, he had flagged what he thought were the best selections in the orchard. So that sort of guided our effort. And then we systematically went through every single tree and collected scion wood. And mostly I consider what I collected for scion wood to be sort of a backup in case Eliza's, down in the south, they aren't fire blight resistant, and just to have it here in Maine. So we are going to plant a small Blaine preservation orchard in the South Orchard at Mafka.
Excellent.
Yeah. And hopefully the trees will do well on Betulafolia. It is very sandy soil at Mafka, unfortunately, but we're going to plant it anyways. And so I guess at this point, we're just sort of waiting. We're in the research period, waiting to hear if the Savannah Institute will be able to use any of these selections in their nursery business and be planted out. So, and I believe Blaine did sell, or I think he sort of gave away some of his selections to different nurseries over the years as well. But he never was clear on like what they were called, like what they were named in the trade. I don't even know if he knew or cared to check up on it, really.
Yeah, what he told me was that he had sent scions to several different nurseries and that he had notes somewhere of what they were. But if those nurseries patented them, the patents had expired at this point.
Yeah.
And I know Eliza did work with his widow, do you remember her name? Pam.
Yeah.
And made a formal agreement with her about how commercialization of these varieties would happen.
Yes.
And so they're currently being worked with on an experimental basis, and then if anything gets commercialized out of that, some money will go back to her.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So right now we signed non-propagation agreements saying that basically we're not going to sell any of Blaine's selections while they're in the research phase of things. So, which none of us probably really would anyway. I mean, I don't do commercial nursery anymore, but just interested in making sure that the selections live on is the biggest thing.
Yeah. Continue his work, I think, is the highest calling, and to if these trees do prove to be really disease and pest tolerant or resistant, they could be very important varieties for the future of sustainable agriculture in this area.
Yeah.
And I do I have a few pears that I've been growing for 10 plus years. And the only one that is like bomb proof, like totally reliable, totally pest free and disease free, is one called New World, which is a Euro-Asian hybrid. And it's loaded every year, like super easy to grow. And the only problem is it's just not very flavorful. It's like this big fruit, even stores well. Like it'll store into February in the root cellar.
Wow.
And I do eat them, but they're like, it's okay.
Where did you find New World?
New World came from Cliff England. Do you know him?
No.
In Kentucky?
Oh, maybe I've heard of.
I think his orchard's name is like England's Orchard.
Okay.
But he's a really interesting nurseryman, really mostly focused on pawpaw and persimmon, and an excellent source for those. But he also kind of grows everything.
Okay. And was it a selection he made, or?
I don't know. Not that I'm aware of, but I think I got it because it was labeled as like exceptional disease resistance. I was like, all right, that's the one. You got to try it.
Yeah.
But I would say basically all of the pears that I tasted at Blaine's had better flavor.
Yeah.
And they basically all taste good and had a flavor ranging from like very similar to a European pear to very similar to like a straight Asian pear.
Yeah.
And there's one which I have tentatively named Blaine Damage, which is not going to be the standout favorite, I don't think, of his many selections, but was my personal favorite. It's small, like, only a little bit bigger than a golf ball, but it has the most intense flavor I've ever tasted. It's sweet, it's sour, it's got a little bit of tannic, and it was just like the first time I ate Schizandra fruit, I was like, wow, this is like an incredible flavor experience. So that's one of the ones that I grafted at my house because I'm like, I want to have that one like right here.
Yeah, I know. I grafted, I think, 10 trays of that. And I'm really glad that we grafted that one and named it because I believe it's the one. So Pam just closed on the property. It's sold to a couple who's very interested in keeping Blaine's Orchard going.
Excellent.
Which is like just the best news ever.
Yes.
The one bad news is that Blaine Damage is like planted on the septic system.
Bummer. Not a great place for a tree long term.
And so I believe it needs to get moved. And actually, they just closed on the property yesterday. So I haven't talked to the new owners, but they would like to try to transplant Blaine Damage. And I just said it's a matter of when. If it has to be moved this summer, that's
going to be rough.
Yeah. But if it can wait until the fall. I mean, it's a pretty large tree, if I remember. So I'm a little
it's like maybe 10 feet tall.
Yeah.
Like
so
maybe 2 to 3 inch caliper.
What's your experience with transplanting fruit trees that big? I mean, I've never
it
tried to
can be
move.
Done.
Okay.
The biggest tree I've ever transplanted was not a fruit tree, but a Dawn redwood that was like 15 feet tall.
Wow.
Oh
wow.
And moved it without heavy equipment, just like shovels and tarps and stuff. And it took a beating. It died back very significantly, maybe like 3/4, but fully recovered after a few years. So, and I don't think we cut it back enough on top. Whenever you're moving a big plant, it really helps to cut the top way back because you're reducing the plant's ability to bring in water.
Yeah.
And if you can cut, if you do it when it's dormant and cut it back on top to make up for the roots you're losing.
Yeah.
I'd say there's at least a at least a 50-50 that tree can survive.
Yeah. So with a fruit tree, would you cut back the leader or cut back some of those tallest branches? Or
I mean, I guess it depends on what form you want it to take in the end.
yeah.
One of the nice things about cutting back is, I always give a percentage, like, oh, when you're making summer cuttings, you want to cut them back by like 90%. And the only thing that really matters is leaf surface. So you can actually just take buds off if you want to put in the effort, or thin branches heavily. So if it's a center leader and you want to maintain that, you can definitely do that.
Yeah. So we'll see what we can do to save
We'll
Blaine damage.
Counsel the new owners as best we can on how to try and save that tree.
Yeah. But they are really interested in learning how Blaine would summer prune and do his pruning technique and that kind of thing.
It's certainly working.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I don't know if I should be encouraging people to summer prune. I mean, I'm still a little nervous about the fire blight. I think you have to be, if you're going to be summer pruning pears, you should be looking at the weather and make sure you're doing it in a dry spell. Like, you're not going to be getting warm rain, which is what spreads fire blight. And maybe not do it in June, like wait till like July and August. I don't know exactly when Blaine would start pruning his trees.
Yeah.
Did you? I wish I had asked him that, but I'm guessing it was.
He was such a
later.
rambler. It was hard to get a straight answer out of him.
It was.
And what I had hoped to do, but didn't end up having time, was to sit down with him in the winter and really interview him, rather than kind of letting a camera phone run while he talked about whatever he wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
He was also somewhat shy in that, when I asked if I could take pictures or video, what he was talking about, he basically said, oh yeah, take whatever you want. I don't want any pictures. I don't want to be in any of the pictures. So a real character.
I'm glad he let you do the recording.
Me too, because I could not keep up with him on paper notes.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. I forget a lot of what he said, unfortunately. And well,
I'll make sure you get an unedited copy of that video, and also pass it along to the new owners for sure.
Oh, so they would like that.
Get some history and background on a lot of the plantings.
Yep.
Well, we've talked a lot of pear stuff. Is there anything that you would like to add to the conversation about Blaine or pears in general, or anything that I missed that I should have mentioned?
Let's see here. Well, I guess, for everyone out there, who's looking at pears, it's, I guess, pay attention to the old pear trees that you see out and about. Some of them might be something really interesting. And even, seedling pears, may have desirable genetics. They've obviously, a lot of the old seedling pears get to be like the size of oak trees, and seem to be fire blight resistant. So they could be valuable for breeding in the future. So I guess if you have a pear tree and you're thinking about whether to cut it down or not, or if it has brown-tailed moth or something else, just consider trying to keep it going if possible. So, and there's a lot of history and a lot of stories that can be found, really with every tree. So cool. Every tree is important.
And if people want to follow your work, is there a way that they can do that?
They can follow me on Instagram, Pears of Maine, where I loosely document some of the old pear trees that I'm finding. And if people do have a pear tree and don't know what it is and would like to try to identify it, I'm happy to help with that process in whatever way.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for doing this interview. It was fascinating, and I really appreciate you sharing your great knowledge of pears.
Thank you for having me. It was fun to be here.
I hope you enjoyed that interview with Lauren, and I see that as being a really nice, concise, but pretty thorough look at pears. And the other part of this episode that I have to offer you are clips of Blaine Fortin. There's a little bit of me in there and a little bit of Nate Kleinman from the Experimental Farm Network. And these clips came from a video that I took on my phone the last time that I visited Blaine at his farm before he died. And I basically was just trying to use it to take notes so that I could keep up with what he was saying, because he talked fast. He's changed subject on a dime. You'll hear a little bit of in the clips, although I've edited out most of it. And he had lots of interesting stuff to say. So the audio quality is going to be pretty variable. There's a lot of background noise. And if you've got what you want to hear about pears, feel free to skip the rest of this. But if you want to hear some stuff from the man himself, I hope you enjoyed the rest of this episode.
What did you want to know again?
How'd you get started, and what was the original cross?
The original cross was a Bartlett type with a Frank J. Woods bridges that connects Brunswick and Tops. And I've told this to Lauren. As you leave in Brunswick, on your right, there's a little landscaped area there. There's a little park, a little grassy knoll, and they've done some landscaping there. This is a little more than 10 years ago, I would say. So I don't know if the original, that's exactly where that pear tree was standing at the time. And it was in decline. It had trunk probably about this big. It was short, maybe 30 feet tall at the most. Had some branches about this diameter that had been snapped off from the wind, but had, thrown shoots up. So it was still growing. It had a good crop. And my brother-in-law and I, at the time, we collected a bunch of fruit off it on a good crop year, and we made peary wine out of it. But that's the original European pear I used to plant at my mother's house, because the Asian pears I got from a store, they were Ninja Seki, 20th century. It was the first time I've ever seen Asian pears in a store, and that was, I can't think of what year it was, because I have to go back in my head where I was working at the time, and Coddle's, the food store was open. They're the ones that carried them. I never.
So you started
just
them from seed?
Great big yellow looking apple. I'd never seen them. I turned them over and said, that's weird bottom. I talked to the produce manager. His name was Ed, and he said they were Asian pears. I said, never heard of them, never seen them. He goes, yeah. He said, yeah, they're full of water. He said, they call them apple pears. And so I bought one. A couple days later, I went in and bought a couple more, and I took the seeds out of them and planted those in rows, and they came up, and when they got about, I'd say they were probably about 5 years old, they started to come out with flowers, and I took the pollen from the European pear I was growing at that time and crossed them with the flowers from that, did the emasculation thing, bagged them and all that, and did them before the flowers had opened, so I would make sure the pollen they were getting had been dried inside a piece of wax paper and all that crapola. Fancy schmancy, but instead of letting nature do it, so I was assured, plus I could mark each cluster and cut out all the fruit except for the one I wanted to carry the seed on, or the crosses. Yeah, and so when they got probably about this high, because they were growing under black walnut trees, which was suppressing them, so they had fruit, but I had to stub the branches into about this far off the trunk all the way around, and the branches were probably about that big around at the time. And the trees were probably all over my head. I'd say maybe 10 foot tall, maybe 12 at the most. But they had a canopy of black walnuts over them. So a guy I used to collect seed with and work with at 3 different nurseries, his name was Corey Stafford. I asked him one day, it was late August, and it was hot as hell summer. And I said, would you like some Asian pears? He says, I've never tried one. I said, no, I've been growing them on my mother's property. I said, cross them with a European pear. So I says, I really don't know what the offspring are going to be. So, because they'd never fruited before. They'd flowered, but then I started cross-pollinating them, and they had little fruit set on them. So I said, I don't know what they're going to be like. I said, but they've already got fruit set on them. I said, but unfortunately, we're going to have to stub them in. So he was saying, it's too late in the year. It's August, you know, it's too dry. He was familiar with working with plants and stuff. I said, well, I got a method of doing it like I've done with peonies so they don't wilt or anything. I said, but we can cut them way back, and we'll dig real wide circles under them and then tease all the dirt off the roots and try and capture as many of the roots as we can. We'll do it very slowly on an overcast day. And we got them dug up all the sand, just shook the sand off the roots and curved the roots and tied a wet burlap bag around them. Then I stubbed in all the branches with loppers to maybe 6 to 12 inches off the trunks, all the way from the crown down. And we rolled them up in wet burlap bags and covered them with a tarp after I sprayed them down with a hose. I said, we'll just leave them in my mother's garage here for like 2 or 3 days. And I says, until we find another day that's going to be overcast and stuff, then we'll dig them up, we'll lift them up, and you can have half and I'll take half. So I think there were 25 trees in all. I gave him half, and he took them out to Jefferson. He either lives in Jefferson or Whitefield. I've only been to his place a couple of times. So he planted a half on his property, and I took the other half and planted them over here. And then from those, I got some more seed from that Bartlett type pear by the Frank J. Woods Bridge on the Brunswick side, and planted some more domesticas on the back side here, 5 of them, I think. You can still see the trunk sticking off, and just see the trees laid down over there. And those flowered, I would say, within 5 years, and I started doing the same thing with these here. When these were flowering, I'd take some of the pollen from the earliest flowering of those and do the same procedure, emasculate the flowers and take the pollen from the domesticas, dry them on wax paper a couple days, and take the petals off the flowers. You always make sure they're not open. You don't cut off the little female parts. You just remove everything else, and then dust them with pollen, rebag them, pull all the other flowers off with that central one, and just wait. And yeah, and then they start swelling in the bag you fill them, and they say, yeah, okay, they get pollinated. But
So
you can get fruit without pollination. Parthenocarpy it's called. And some of the persimmons have it, like the meter persimmon, and there's a few other fruit, bananas, and a few other. But it's rare in nature, and usually if they're not producing seed, they're not going to propagate themselves in the wild. If a branch falls and presses them into the ground continuously, and yeah.
So the domestica parents were all seedlings from that original tree, or they were
Yes.
They were seedlings from that original tree. Cool.
None of them were cloned.
Okay, cool. So
the only trees
there's
I've
some
cloned here is
diversity
a golden chain tree, probably half a dozen of the hickories, and a couple black walnuts.
So how many different grafts do you have on this tree?
They're either stock or they're a grafted variety on top of a stalk.
Oh, okay.
So sometimes I let the stalk express itself, which is what these lower
What
branches
these are
here.
Okay.
And then what's on top is what I grafted. And a lot of what you see grafted on the top have the neck on the European form.
Mm-hmm. So I can munch on these ones?
All you want, yeah.
Mmm. And the stock is pure Asian? On this one?
No, the stalks are all hybrid too. But some of the stalks express the...
I see.
You take one of these and try one of those. They're all a little bit different. Yeah, there may be two ripe too.
No.
Because the stalks, some of the stalks accelerate the ripening process, some delay it, and some influence the taste of the ones you grafted them to.
Oh, this one's delicious.
Yeah, see?
I'm eating.
Yeah, and they're all different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and see, they do seed. They'll self-seed. And again, you just dig up some of these seedlings, you'll see that they're going to have different characteristics than what grafted on. But
So what's your pruning schedule?
Like I told Lauren, I usually do it 3 times a year.
Uh-huh.
Because rather than come out here, if you let them get too big, you're actually making big, like when they get to, that's, you know, all but 1 year except for that little side shoot there.
Yep.
So that's everything that grew this year, the last 24 inches there. This is pretty much the year before with one bud that got activated when I cut it back here. That one gets stimulated close to the cut. The rest are subdued, but if I cut it off, like 2 or 3 leaves up into here and leave that little side shoot and trim it to a downward facing bud, 2 or 3 nodes up, that'll form a big extension the next year. That'll get suppressed. It'll throw out all these. Will be throwing spurs. It'll be throwing spurs everywhere. So I just told Lauren, if you look at the growth and you can count back, you know, this is 1 year's growth up to here, and you can see where I cut it last year, and you know, cut it close, and here, because it was close to where I made the cut, you're going to get some stimulus there. But if I had cut it back here, what would have happened? One of these would have got stimulated. But again, to keep it as short as possible, because if you let them get too big, you're making stimulating cuts. You actually stimulate, throw more shoots. So I do summer pruning because it makes the plant a little bit anemic, and it keeps the growth retarded. So I don't have to do it. If you do it, like in spring, it's had all year to grow these long shoots, and you're making these bigger cuts, which take more callus to heal them over and all stuff. So rather than expend all that energy doing that, I'd rather have them wasting their energy growing fruit. So, and if I can keep it in a short area like this, so I'm looking for plants, you know, seedling selection, looking for plants that have large leaf surfaces so they can make a bunch of energy for the tree. And then I also look for seedlings that have short internodes between the buds.
Yep.
And if there's one here and then one way up here, it's not one I'm probably going to want to go unless it has excellent fruit or whatever. So look for large leaves on them, short internodes. I look for characteristics of wildness, like some of these spurs are like needles on the end, and I've been surprised. 2 of the varieties I have needle-like spurs on them on the ends but they produce excellent fruit. You know, large diameter fruit. Have you tried any of these pears off this tree here?
Nope.
Well, try some on that branch over there. They're different. You look at the stems on them.
I'll go.
And you'll see they're all different. Yeah, grab one of these up here. Up here, my son. Yep, you'll see the thickness of the stem. And is the basin on the bottom naked, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, see, that looks like it's pure Asian, but it doesn't. It's not pure Asian. It's got characteristics of the European. You just don't see them, but they're blended in or suppressed. Some are dominant, the characteristics. Some blend in. So the oaks do the same thing. You can cross a bunch of oak trees and build the bird nests.
Oh yeah.
There's one here. There's one in that tree over there. There's one of the yellow one we just left. They love the crotches here because they prune them so they're very rigid, and they can get, you know, nest here, and the nest isn't going anywhere. So they like those nice junctions right there. So how was that one? Sucked?
No, flavor's good. It's got the gritty,
Grit cells.
the grit cells. Yeah.
Yep.
So are you kind of pruning throughout the whole season, or are there windows where you're trying to hit?
I never prune in the winter. I never prune in the spring because almost all the growth I get is through the summer. You're not going to get any through the winter. It's already out there. And I don't want to let them get to a large diameter and throw a bunch, and all of a sudden you cut them in the spring. It's like all of a sudden, see, that catalpa's got a bunch of seed on it. That's Farge's catalpa from China, that one. It's got a bunch of seed if you want to collect some seed off of it. But, you know, and if you don't get to them, they do that straight upright thing. So I use the spreaders on them to, you know, get them away so that otherwise the fruit, you know, each branch would be, you know, 5-6 feet higher. You wouldn't be able to harvest them. So I bend them down with the wooden spreaders, and then I continually cut the tips back. You know, it's usually 2 to 4 leaves, and keep them stubbed, and then close to where the pruning cuts are, and the ones on the top, I'll keep them cut to 1 or 2 leaves, and I also use those to prop the spreaders against, to hold them against a branch that's more rigid above it to keep these ones suppressed. So I keep them wider at the bottom and more narrow as you go up the tree, so each branch gets its own amount of light, and I don't allow these to grow back into the middle of the tree. So anything that's growing this way or straight up, like this one, would probably be cut back to 2 or 3 buds here where you see a little node coming out in the bottom, and I just keep them tight on each branch.
Yeah, they look great.
Yeah. Been pruned but once this year. These have been pruned but once this spring. That was it. I've gotten some of them, you know, over the last week or two, but yeah, it just takes a long time to do them. Again, it's a bad year for these pears because they're not irrigated. It's been bone dry. They were in competition with a million other fruit.
This is what they look like in a bad year?
Well, you know, there's a late ripening variety over there.
And you don't spray them with anything?
No, nothing. Never have. The only buds I've ever seen on these are pear phyla. Once every 10 trees you'll see a couple of these little wet-looking slug-like animals, and they're called pear phyla. P-S-Y-L-L-A, and they're just like, they just suck on the surface of the leaf through, you know, the epidermal layer. That's it. They don't really eat any, there's no holes or nothing, just kind of suck through the leaf. That's probably not going to be tasty, but you can try. That one's probably going to need to be grafted onto something more worthy. Like that one on the end is starting to color up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take that one?
Yeah, just push it back towards the tree. There you go.
This one, really good.
See that starting to brown inside? That's a characteristic they inherit from the European pear called water core. Well, the Asians have diseases they carry too, like one's called black end, where the bottom quarter or third of the fruit just turns real pitch black, and you can put your finger right up into it, like blossom end rot on a tomato, similar to that. So those trees get weeded out. But the water core, I don't mind it because it's actually sweeter. It's already starting to ferment. European pears ripen from the inside out, and Asian pears ripen all at once. The tissue's as ripe on the outside as on the inside. In fact, Asian pears have a deterrent on the inside of the pear close to the core. They start getting bitterish. But with this water core, it's even sweeter than it is with the, like persimmons, the astringent, the non-astringent persimmons. You grow persimmons at all?
Yeah. Mostly, again, I steward wild trees.
So, but yeah, that's what I found is that the older the plant is, the more resistant it is to the cold, not genetically, but through tissue buildup on the trunk and maybe on the buds. But yeah, so the older parts seem to be more, and the younger parts, as you get to the tips of the branches on the tops, they'll freeze back a little bit, but the older wood doesn't seem to do that once they get to a certain age, and it may be dependent upon each seedling, because genetically each one's going to have a little different hardiness to it, and just to do walnuts is incredibly difficult to do.
Yeah, I tried to graft pecans once and I failed on every try.
Yeah.
I let the rootstocks keep growing, so now I have these 20-foot tall pecan seedlings.
Yeah, probably if you had suppressed those, it would have, you know, pushed the juices into the top part you grafted. And you have to do it the right season too. Walnut, you can't graft a walnut unless it's in the 80s.
Oh yeah.
And you have to wait for the, because they have
It's got to be hot.
chambered piths on them. And so what you have to do is when that pith is in the jelly stage, that's when you take your grafts and graft them onto walnuts, is when they're in that jelly stage. If they're outside the jellies, it's too late. They're not going to unite. So that's from Henry Converse, because he did a bunch of grafting and stuff. He's the one that set up the plants at the Dolly Parton theme park there in
Interesting.
Arkansas, I guess. Yeah, he was in charge of that. I got letters from him and all kinds of people.
It's okay if I go pee in the woods over there?
Go pee anywhere you want.